Welcome, seekers of truth, coming to you from the edge of the known universe, better known as the Granite State, home of Betty and Barney Hill. Through the magic of electronic alchemy, a portal to another dimension has opened. You are about to make a metaphysical connection. This is the Fedora Chronicles Network. Mike Williams, host of Sage of Quay radio show, joins us to discuss a controversial conspiracy theory that just won't go away. Mike presents a convincing argument based on years of research that the original Paul McCartney was decapitated in a car crash in 1966. He was replaced by an impostor named Bill Shepard, who continues to play the role to this day. We also discuss the pivotal role of the Tavistock Institute and the Masonic influence on this 50-year charade. As the saying goes, if you're going to tell a lie, make it a big one. Decide for yourself. All coming up next on The Metaphysical Connection, episode 86. Just to introduce Mr. Mike Williams, apparently he is perhaps one of the experts on the conspiracy theory, or I like to say conspiracy fact, regarding Paul McCartney and his alleged death in the 1960s. And you also host your own podcast or radio show, Mike. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I started actually with a blog going back, I guess it was 2010 or so, and around 2014, early 2014, I got into the radio piece of it. It's internet radio. I have a YouTube channel called Sage of Quay Radio, and I've been doing both of those in parallel ever since. So I really like getting into conspiracy research. I like getting into the esoteric, the occult. I also love getting into the spiritual aspects of existence. So both the blog and the radio show encompass all of those various types of topics and paths.
So, Mike, I want to ask you before we get rolling on the topic du jour. The name for your show, where does that come from? It's interesting. I looked up Quay. I guess that's a kind of a dock or a wharf. Does that have anything to do with it, or is that way off base?
Yeah, no, it doesn't have anything to do with it. It's,
okay.
It's a very interesting story. I've been looking into alternative research for a long time, and so I would talk to people about it, and amongst friends and family. So they would joke around with me, in poking, but in a nice way, and they would say, "Oh, it's such sage advice," or "He's such a sage. He's looking into all of this stuff."
Right.
And so that's where the sage piece came. And then the Quay, Quay, is actually a part of a town that I live in, and so it became the Sage of Quay. And when I first came up with the name, to be honest with you, I wasn't even sure that I liked it, but it just stuck. And so now I'm the Sage of Quay.
That's how it happens.
It catches your attention. It makes it. The first thing I thought of was, "Ooh, what does that mean?" I mean, I got the sage part; it's pretty clear, but I didn't know where the Quay came from. But anyway, that's an interesting thing. So, so our listeners, I'm suspecting that after we get done with the show today, some of our listeners are going to want to connect to your show. Where is it available? It's on YouTube, and I know I've watched a couple of your videos, particular to the Paul's dead controversy, but I know you probably have a lot of other ones on there too.
Yeah, the best way to contact me and to reach all of my media would be to go to my hub website, and it is sageofquay.com. So Sage, SAGE of OFQUAY.com. If you go there, you'll be able to hit my YouTube channel, DTube, BitChute, Mixcloud, and a bunch of other stuff, Twitter, and so on.
Great. Okay, you got a lot of stuff going on, which is good. So before we get going on the Paul aspect, which I think is enormously interesting, and I'll have to say, and I think you're in the same category as me. When I first started hearing about this stuff, I thought, that's just something the Beatles came up with to maybe to sell more records, or they're just goofing on people because they liked it.
Yeah.
They kind of did that kind of stuff, And after listening to be honest with you, after listening to your interview with, I think it was a lady named Sophia
Smallstorm.
Yes. I was a convert. I mean, you convinced me, and I know a lot of the information you're pulling from is a book that came out that I guess was apparently written by or ghostwritten by a guy for the person who apparently is the faux Paul, or as I guess John Lennon coined the term faul, F-A-U-L, meaning fake Paul. So, I have to say you turned my head around with what you put out there, and it's very involved and it's very intricate. But the way you lay it out there, it all makes perfect sense. It really does when you start thinking about it. And the biggest thing for me is that when you look at just the Paul part of it, it's kind of like a microcosm of the larger picture, and that begins with the Tavistock Institute, which we did, as I told you in my email when I contacted you. We've done 2 shows on that now, and we got up to the point where the Beatles came in. So it seemed logical to try and get a hold of you and try and talk a little bit more about that. So I think when you put it in that context, to me, it starts to make a lot more sense, with the totality of it, I guess. So I don't know. Can you talk a little bit more about the Tavistock aspect of the Beatles, kind of as a lead up to to what happened with the Paul thing? Because some of our listeners may have not heard the previous show. Hopefully, most of them have. But just as a kind of lead up to that. So I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Well, first of all, let me just say that the book is the Memoirs of Billy Shears, and the author, actually, they refer to him as the encoder, is Thomas E.U. Harriot. And I always start the show, guys, by letting folks know that I have absolutely nothing to do with the book. I'm not compensated in any way. It's just a book that I picked up, and I can't even tell you why I did. But I read it going back in early 2016, and it was something that blew me away. It's 666 pages, 66 chapters, so you have all the occulted numerology.
There you go,
Yep. Right. And then I did the show with Sophia, and I didn't even want to do that show, to be honest with you. Sophia's a very good friend of mine, so I was just chatting with her offline. And I was telling her about the book, and she said, "Hey, Mike, you need to come on my podcast and talk about the book." And I really dragged my feet because I didn't want to, become the Paul is dead guy, which I think now is probably
too late.
I can just forget that.
that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
And then 2, I knew it was going to take an enormous amount of prep to get the book into some kind of format where I can present it, because it's 666 pages. So it took me a long time to put it into PowerPoint and to break down the various aspects and topics that the book presents. So I've done that now, so it's a lot easier for me to talk about it. Now, in the book, it says that it clearly states that the Beatles are a Tavistock creation. They are a Tavistock project, and they have been from the very beginning. And I know that there are some folks don't like to hear that because they want to believe that the Beatles were organic from the onset, and that's just not true. So from the very beginning, it was all Tavistock, and the reason for it was to social engineer, plain and simple. I think the biggest win out of this for Tavistock was their ability to swap out one of the most famous musicians, entertainers at the peak of their popularity back in 1966, and really nobody noticed. Of course, there was a small percentage of people that questioned or maybe looked at it kind of strange, like, I don't know, he looks a little different there. But for all intents and purposes, nobody noticed. And this was huge for Tavistock. It really set the stage for bigger and better things down the road as far as further understanding the human psyche. And because that's, as you guys know, since you've done shows on Tavistock, that's what they're in business to do, to social engineer, to brainwash, to indoctrinate and so on. It's propaganda. And at the end of the day, that's what the McCartney conspiracy, the Paul is dead conspiracy, is all about. It's all about the fact that they swapped the guy out. He was very famous. Virtually everybody knew him, and nobody noticed.
And, it seems like part of the, from studying what Tavistock does and some of the other groups attached to Tavistock is that when there's an event, they like to do it in plain sight. And what there's some kind of energy attached to that. They get some kind of power, I guess, from like with the Kennedy assassination.
I was waiting for that.
Killing the king in plain sight.
Right.
Basically televised. So I think maybe is it your understanding that there's some of that kind of thing, that kind of energy attached to this as well, where they're just like putting it in our faces and saying, "Hey, look what we can do." That kind of thing.
Well, virtually everything in the occult is hidden in plain sight. So yes, they absolutely hide in plain sight. And are they into the occult? Absolutely. I mean, they are hand in hand with British Freemasonry. So they are part of the circle of adepts and initiates into the mystery religions. And this is what they do. It's part of the whole. Maybe some people might understand it better if I say it's part of the inner circle of the ruling elite, because it's all secret societies, and that's another thing that many people have a difficult time with because they don't understand secret societies. But our world is controlled by these societies, by the brotherhoods, by the Freemasons. And if you go up the ladder a little bit more, it becomes the Illuminati and so on. And once you do the research, I know you guys have, you come to the conclusion, a sound conclusion, that that's the way the world works. Virtually everything is engineered and orchestrated, and anything worth knowing, and I've said this on many shows, is a lie.
I think that for a lot of people is that if you do any kind of significant reading, if you actually open your mind and you listen to other people's opinions, even if they don't jive with your worldview, after a while you get a sense that everybody in the collective unconscious understands there is something very wrong going on here. We can't put our finger on it. And a perfect example, Walt and I have brought this up many times, whereas the Wall Street Journal, which is printed in different printing houses all over the country, had different front pages for the same edition of the same exact newspaper with different headlines to accommodate and to appease the local demographics, as it were. That's just the most overt example that you can look at. You also look at how they slant the news. Everybody does it, whether it's Fox, MSNBC, NPR, PBS. They all have a twist or an angle or a spin to it. And everybody, I bet, is listening to this. They got to be shrugging their shoulders to say, come on, do you really think that the Tavistock Institute is behind all of this? And your answer to that is, Mike?
My answer is yes. Absolutely, they are. And that's the other thing, the trap that people fall into. They believe that all of this is too big for any one organization or a group of organizations to be able to control. And if you do the research and you dig into the ruling class and into their occultism, it's pretty easy to see. Like you said, once you have an open mind and you start thinking critically. I mean, as an example, the Tavistock Foundation, or Tavistock Institute, I should say, has developed such power in the U.S. that no one achieves prominence in any field unless they've been trained in behavioral sciences at Tavistock or one of its subsidiaries. And through the Stanford Research Institute, Tavistock controls the National Education Association. And we can go on and on. They are also behind the Esalen Institute, which is behind the whole New Age movement, MIT, the Hudson Institute, Heritage Foundation, the Center of Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown, where State Department personnel and Air Force intelligence and the RAND corporations are trained. So, we have to understand that the people who control, it's a pyramid structure. So you don't need millions and millions and millions of people to control. All you need is a small kludge that are in control. They control your money, they control your education system, they control your military, they control your governments, they control your media, they control all of that. So, once you have control of all of those mechanisms and all those variables in society and the cultures, it's not very difficult to begin to understand that that they have enormous influence. You mentioned, was it the New York Times in their article?
Wall Street Journal, I'm sorry.
The Wall Street Journal, I'm sorry. Okay, the Wall Street Journal. Well, another example of that would be, and many folks have seen this on YouTube, where the local news across the country have the same lead-in for a particular story, the same one. And it's the same exact words. It's the same exact script. And you have to ask yourself, well, how did that happen? Well, the reason that happens is because I believe it's 5 or 6 corporations. The number used to be 6. Maybe it's less now. Maybe it's 5. But they control all of the major media in this country. I think down in Australia, it's 2. It's 2 companies. So the way I explain it, guys, to folks, and we'll use the media as an example, 6 companies. So how can 6 companies control the message? Well, all it takes is 6 people to sit in the room from those different companies on a conference call, whatever it may be, and to decide what it is they're going to show and what it is they're not going to show, what they're going to tell us and what they're not going to tell us. I mean, it's really that simple, and it does. It takes a person to be able to take the blinders off and let go of the institutionalized belief systems that we have and just, let it roll. And once you do that, a lot of this stuff will start to make sense.
Mike, I wanted to, just real quick, I wanted to ask you, getting back to just backpedaling just a peg, the red and blue thing, I had not heard that before. But oddly enough, I was just in an antique shop the other day looking at vintage vinyl, and I saw the first section of the Beatles album, the earlier, what was it, 61 to 66, I think?
62 to 66, the red album.
62 to 62. That's red, and then the other one is blue. I was just looking at them, but at the time I didn't know about the color thing. But does that correlate to our political parties, the red and the blue? Is that another way of indicating that they have their hands deeply embedded into those?
Absolutely. That's why you see red and blue. I mean, there's a couple of reasons, but the red and blue is it's all Freemasonry. And it's the Red Lodge and the Blue Lodge. And the other reason why they use red and blue is because from a human psychology perspective, the mind sees the color red, and red is warning, be alarmed, have concern, pay attention. And then blue is more of a calming effect, an effect that has on the mind generosity as an example. So that's why a lot of your big box stores like Walmart and Sam's Club, their decor is blue. And so when you go in there, you're more apt to spend money. So the whole understanding of the human mind is extremely advanced, and it's extremely intricate. And, I by trade, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I have been a hypnotherapist for a long time. So I have an understanding of the human mind and how it works and suggestions and so on. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a couple of things. Yes, the red and blue on your television set. Whenever you're watching a like cable news as an example, you're going to see the sets are predominantly red and blue. You're going to have somebody come on the show like a pundit, and they're going to talk about why we should be alarmed about a particular event, shooting that took place. Most of the time, that woman will be dressed, if it's a lady, in a red dress. If it's a guy, he'll have a red tie. Because what is being telegraphed to us is, please pay attention. This is important for you to focus on. Or if it's somebody coming on to talk about something else, and let's just say, oh, just calm down. Don't worry about it. We have it under control. No need to worry. That lady, if it's a lady speaking, will be decked out in a blue outfit. Or if it's a guy, he'll have a blue tie on. That's why a lot of times you'll see Trump come out, or before him, Obama, red ties, blue ties. They wear other ties occasionally, but most of the time it's red and blue. And you think to yourself, boy, we should give these guys a color wheel because we have more than just red and blue colors.
Right.
There's more colors in the spectrum,
too. The funny thing is, I'm sorry, most people don't think about. I mean, they look at the guy speaking and they say, "Oh, he's got a red tie on, or he's got a blue tie on," and they don't realize that there's some significance to that. In fact, I noticed that. But I didn't ever really take it to the next step and say, well, there's some kind of symbology or symbolism attached to that. It makes sense when you start thinking about it.
They all speak in, I don't say speak, but they communicate in signs and symbols. See, that's the thing. Their words are for the profane. We are considered the profane. We are the unknowing. We are not adepts. We are not initiates in the mysteries. So in their secret societies, in their brotherhoods. So when they speak their words are for us. And it's all about deception and manipulation and steering of the thought and the steering of consciousness. But when they have their hand signs and their color codes and all that stuff, that's for them. They're communicating within their secret society, within their brotherhood. That's how they communicate. When Trump walks around making the upside down triangle all the time. Okay, so this is esoteric, occulted symbols that are being used, and again, most people, the vast majority of people, I should say, are not going to pick up on that. It goes right over their heads. And even when I've had conversations with people and I've explained to them, take a look for that. Take a look at certain things. They think I'm crazy, but
But I also think there's a subconscious level to it too. We may not. When I say we, I'm talking about myself being a member of the profane. Does that somehow stick in our consciousness though? That maybe on a conscious level, we don't pick up on it necessarily, or we don't look at it and say, oh, he's making an Illuminati sign, because most people don't even know what that is, I don't think, or they think the Illuminati is some stuff that somebody made up. But does that stick in our subconscious on some level? You being a hypnotherapist, you must have some sense of that.
I think for some people, yes. For most people, no. This is how it was explained to me, and this was explained to me by a very high-level Freemason. Mm-hmm. What they do is they look to separate the wheat from the chaff. So when they speak, as an example, their speaking is layered. Think of it in terms like peeling back an onion. So on the surface, the words might mean one thing. But then if you peel back the words and you really analyze what it is that's being said, you can get to a second layer of meaning or third layer of meaning. That third layer of meaning is the true meaning. So it's called, in the world of Freemasonry, it's referred to as speaking masterfully. Mm-hmm. So a Mason who speaks masterfully and is very good at it can tell a ton of truth. But you have to understand how it is that the words are being put together in order to get that truth. If you don't understand it and you're not paying attention to it, then what's going to happen is you're not going to get it. In the minds of the Masons, when they do this to the profane, and for the profane that pick up on it, they view that as them, the Freemasons, enlightening you. There's a process of illumination taking place because you're starting to get it. You're starting to understand it. And then anybody else who doesn't get it, well, they get what they deserve because they are not thinking. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is how it works. Yeah, right.
They're not in the inside club. They're on the outside. That kind of brings me to kind of get back to the Beatles a little bit. I uncovered a guy named Theodor Adorno. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard about him.
Yes.
So he apparently was. I think he was Italian, but he spent a good portion of time in Germany. He may actually have been German, pre World War II, and he studied behavioral techniques and how to manipulate society through tonality and the intonation of language and things like that. And the some of the thinking is that he was influential, or he was hired by Tavistock at any rate to, or brought in by Tavistock to impact the lyrics of the Beatles. Do you know much about that, Mike, or have you uncovered any of that?
Well,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know about Theodor Adorno, and some will say that he wrote the Beatles' music, especially the early stuff.
Yeah.
Prior to.
Not sure about that, but.
Well. I'm just saying that's a theory that's out there. I don't personally subscribe to it, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. But do I believe that Theodor Adorno and others within Tavistock were instrumental in helping to shape the Beatles' lyrics and sound? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, whether it was Theodor Adorno himself or somebody like Theodor Adorno, I have come to the conclusion that the Beatles were very much orchestrated. That I'm not saying that Biological Paul or John didn't come in with a song. They wrote songs. But then what happened after that was the whole production process and the layering of, let's say, George Martin's orchestration. The assistance of maybe tweaking lyrics, things like that. I do not discount that at all.
I'd like to actually interject here and ask you about other bands. Could this have something to do with anything to do with the fact that other bands who tried to replicate what the Beatles were doing were not able to capture the imagination of the American public? Like, say, maybe the Moody Blues or the Rolling Stones. They tried to do something very similar to the Beatles, but they didn't catch on because they did not have the background orchestration or manipulation by the Tavistock Institute? Or is there evidence that the Tavistock Institute had also worked with other bands trying to duplicate that success?
Oh, the Tavistock definitely worked with the Stones. So the Rolling Stones were considered the bad boys of rock and roll, and the Beatles the good guys, and that was intentionally done to have that duality. But I will say, and there have been other bands. I would say that most of the British invasion, as an example, were in some way Tavistock projects, maybe some more than others, but influenced by Tavistock. Now, the thing with the Beatles is, and I've always noticed this because myself, I'm a musician, I'm a guitarist and, write songs and stuff like that. I've always noticed, even from a very early age, that the quality of the Beatle recordings, even going back to, let's say, 1963 and their first album, Please Please Me, the recordings are impeccable. They are impeccable. And when the Beatles re-released their albums back, I guess it was in the 1980s on CD, you can really hear how well the Beatle recordings were recorded initially. And then you could take a look, take a listen to other bands like the Rolling Stones, and it wasn't that way. I mean, the Stones had decent recordings, but it wasn't this pristine recording like the Beatles had. The same thing with Led Zeppelin. If you listen to Led Zeppelin's music, like one song that sticks out is the Immigrant Song. The very beginning, the original version of the song, there's a lot of tape hiss, and I thought to myself, why would anybody release that song with that much tape hiss? Why wouldn't they either try to reduce the hiss or re-record the song so it wouldn't be there? Later on, Jimmy Page, when he went back and he remixed and remastered all of the Led Zeppelin library, he took care of that. But the point I'm trying to make is that there were other great bands out there, and the quality of the recordings were not like that of the Beatles. The Beatles were front and center, head and shoulders above everybody else. And we're going back to 1963. So in my view, again, this is my view, they had big plans for the Beatles, and they knew 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line where they were going to go with the material. And that's why it was done the way it was done.
So, Mike, I wanted to get back to, just for a brief moment, to Adorno, only because I think it's an important aspect of this. This is my opinion, but I think he may have added things like on She Loves You, the yeah part, those kinds of things, because he understood the resonance of language. And when you think about it, those were the things that really kind of stuck in your mind. I mean, on some level, She Loves You is sort of just a surface kind of love song, Right. But there's something about it that just sticks, it just sticks. And I think he may have been he was kind of putting the cherry on the sundae, maybe, or adding the stuff that really sticks to the bones when people listen to it. That at least that's my thinking anyway. But another aspect is that if you remember back when, and you probably know about this, but if you remember back when Michael Jackson bought the rights to to all the Beatles songs.
Right.
I don't remember exactly when that was. It was back a ways, I guess, in the 80s maybe or something. But and I think Paul or the person posing as Paul,
Bill.
I think was bidding on that when he got outbid by Michael Jackson, which is hard for me to believe, but with the money he probably has. But the rights to the songs were owned by Theodor Adorno's estate. That's who Michael Jackson bought them from. So, how do you explain that? How'd that happen?
Yeah, well, the whole rights situation is very convoluted. I had a person contact me who is very prominent in the music industry and was explaining to me about that whole situation with Michael Jackson, and later on it became Sony that Bill, playing the part of Paul McCartney, the battle he was having over the rights. The Theodor Adorno portion of it, I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, there is no explanation other than the fact that somehow it was tied back to Theodor Adorno.
Yeah.
So, right? So the whole thing is, the way it was explained to me was the royalties and the rights, very complex, going back especially into the early days. And while you ask that question, I want to explain something, because this was what was explained to me. You guys remember when McCartney or Bill was trying to buy the rights, like you said, from Michael Jackson. Well, the reason why he was trying to buy the rights from Jackson, and later on he had a legal battle with Sony, was because he does not own the rights, the copyrights, as the owner of the song. Biological Paul does, you see. So he wasn't getting any money from the songs sense. Like Yesterday, Michelle, and so on. He wasn't getting any money from that. He was getting zero. This is why in the early days when he would go out and do concerts, he may do a couple of token early Beatles songs that weren't his, but everything else was post, from 1967 on, and of course his Wing stuff and his solo stuff. Mm-hmm. And what he was really doing was he was trying to get a piece of the publisher's action. That's what he was trying to do. So when he was trying to buy the publishing rights from Michael Jackson, he was actually trying to get rights for the songs that he didn't own because he was not the original songwriter. It was biological Paul. Now, when he didn't win that battle with Michael Jackson, what he was then doing when Jackson passed and the songs are in the possession of the publishing rights in the possession of Sony, is Bill was looking to negotiate with Sony to say, look, give me a share of your publishing rights because I can make you money. Because if I play these songs in concert, the mechanical licenses are going to kick in, and the royalties are going to flow. The money's going to flow. So, give me a piece of the action and we're good. And that's what he was battling about. Because normally a songwriter is not going to go to their publisher and say, I want a piece of your action too, because I already got my piece. I wrote the song. So I'm getting the owner's portion of the royalties, right? I'm a songwriter. That's how it works for me. My publisher is TuneCore. So I don't go to TuneCore and say, I want a piece of your action too. I mean, you sign an agreement.
Right.
And so that's what was going on with that. And finally, he closed with Sony. The two of them are going head to head, and then there was an agreement. It's sealed. It's confidential, and they brokered a deal. So what that says to me is Bill got a share of the publishing royalties from Sony. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's another clue. People might say, well, why is that a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because it says that he's not biological Paul. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been going round and round with Michael Jackson and Sony.
I want to be able to.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
I want to be able to make sure that everybody understands. When you refer to Bill, you're talking about the person who is masquerading as Paul McCartney. Is that correct?
Yes. William Shepard or Bill Shepard, Billy Shears. Some people want to call him Billy Campbell, William Campbell. I call him Bill Shepard because that's the name that he gives us in the memoirs of Billy Shears.
Okay.
Well, who's Billy Campbell? Is that just another moniker that he's used prior to the whole thing happening?
Yeah, he claims that Bill Campbell or William Campbell was a moniker that was given to him by Fred Labor back during the 1969 time frame. Labor, I think, had a radio show, and Labor had, according to Shepard in the book, he had taken some leeway with how much of the story he was going to put out there. Shepard says that they had actually leaked and given Labor information to work with to begin the whole process of the rumors to give them some more momentum. And one of the leeways that Labor took was he came up with the name Campbell, and that kind of stuck. Now, in the book, Bill Shepard says that he has relatives who are Campbells. He's Scottish, by the way. He's not British. But he claims in the book his real surname is Shepard.
Do you want to get into the book a little bit, Mike? Because that really is, I think, the definitive information anyway. Apparently from what I could glean from the internet and stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit about? I know it's extensive and it's a huge amount of material, but maybe you can kind of synthesize it a little bit to get it down to something that's a manageable quantity that makes the whole thing, because that really does make the whole thing make sense in some ways. So I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, so the book was released on September 9th of 2009. Now, one of the things that you pick up in the book is that the number 9 and the number 6 are very, very important. So Paul McCartney, biological Paul McCartney, is represented by the number 9 in numerology, and Shepard himself is the number 6. So that's why you have 666 pages, 66 chapters. But you'll find that release dates and key dates, many times Bill Shepard is using the number 9. So as an example, as I mentioned, the Memoirs of Billy Shears was released on September 9, 2009. That's 999. This year, I was told this in advance, and I did have it out on Facebook. I think I may have had it out on one show, too. I really wish I had gotten it out earlier so that people could see it was a validation. I was told by a source within the inner circle, Bill's inner circle. Well, I guess I would first, maybe I shouldn't say inner circle, but there are groups, there are teams working for Bill on the process of disclosure. So a person within one of those groups contacted me and said to me that, okay, so here's another clue for you, Mike. He's going to release his new album, and it's going to be released, and it's going to have 999 again. So I said, okay, so September 9th, 2018, because the last two digits of 2018, 1 and 8, 1 plus 8 is 9. He actually released on September 7th, 2018. And, some people said to me, gee, Mike, he didn't release on September 9th. However, when you regroup the numbers, it's September, that's the 9th month, 7 plus the 2 from 2018, 7 plus 2 is 9, plus the 1 plus 8, the last two digits of the year, is 999. So we did it again. I was also told that along with releasing the album, he was going to announce a tour, in which indeed he did. And the reason why I'm telling the folks this is because, there's a lot of information that has come to me from various people, and I have to check it all out. Some of it, I just deem as nonsense, and other stuff that I believe to have some substance to it, I follow up on. But it's things like this that are coming to me, and these things are happening. He did release the album. It was associated with the 9s. He did announce a tour, and I should not have known about a tour, 2 or 3 months ago, but I did. So anyway, So the book is loaded up with numbers. It is what they refer to as layered, which means that I was talking before about the peeling the onion back. So there's the first layer of words, but then when you start to take a look at the words at a second level or a third level, basically doing a deeper dive, you start to understand more and more about what's really the story that's really being told. So the book itself is being masterfully written, okay? And the person that's telling us the story is Bill Shepard. That's what he claims in the book, that it's Shepard himself coming out as part of the disclosure process to clue us in. And so what they did was they released the book, they did it independent publishing, self-publishing. And this is something that he does as well. People who know of him and his work through the years, Bill playing Paul McCartney, he does a lot of uncredited work. Or if he takes credit for something, a lot of times he will use an alias. So putting the book out kind of under the radar is not uncommon. It's not something that would be unusual for how he likes to operate. He likes to do things in a tongue-in-cheek type of way. He likes to do it as basically part of puzzle solving. And this is how Bill is. He's a very bright guy, loves anagrams, has an incredible respect for numbers. He is into the occult. He is into mysticism. And all of this is stated in the book. So reason why I'm doing this I'm prefacing it here a little bit, guys, is because sometimes people just believe it's just another run-of-the-mill Beatles book, and it's really not. And I've read a lot of books on the Beatles over the years. So just the other thing I want to say, it's not the only book I have read about the Beatles or McCartney and so on. It's 666 pages. It claims that biological Paul died on September 11th, 1966. It claims it was a car crash. Other researchers will be very adamant and say it wasn't September, it was August, or it was November. Again, I don't get hung up on it. It doesn't really matter whether he died in August, September, or November. I think that you're majoring in the minors when you get stuck. You're kind of stuck in the weeds. At the very least, the reason why they put the September 11th number out there is because, as you guys know, looking into the occult, September 11th is a very important date in the occult. He says that his name is William Bill Shepard. His full name is William Wallace Shepard. He says that he is descendant of William Wallace, who was the great Scottish warrior. He is the warrior that was played by Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart. He states very clearly the Beatles were a Tavistock project, that the Beatles are an occult Masonic creation, that virtually all of the Beatles songs post 9/11, 1966 include Paul is Dead clues, and the occult origins and underpinnings within the Beatle story is referred to as Paulism. Right, so Paulism is a form of occultism. It's mysticism. Some will refer to it as Satanism. And there's a very strong thread of Crowley's mysticism and magic in the book. Even though Bill himself says that he does not subscribe to Crowley. He says that Crowley was a doctrine of hate, but he clearly states that, he's very, very well versed in the occult, in mysticism, in the esoteric, and so on. Tom Hugh Harriet is from Amazon. This is a description that was there: bio, author, poet, philosopher, speaker, and teacher. He had a Bachelor of Arts degree in English at Brigham Young University. And, for those that are in the know, it's Brigham Young is virtually all Mormon. I think 95% of its student population is Mormon. There's about 5% that are not. Mormonism is connected at the hip with Freemasonry. In fact, Tom did write me and say that he did leave the Mormon Church in 2009, but he can't say the same thing about Freemasonry.
So he's an actual person then.
Absolutely. Okay, maybe we should talk about that a little bit too.
Why do they refer to him as an encoder? Is it an encoder? Is that what you said?
An encoder. Yep.
What's going on with that?
Because in the book, along with the words that you read, there's multiple layers of encoding. So there is, throughout the book, on each page, there are bolded letters. And if you read the bolded letters by themselves, they are sentences. So these sentences will give you additional clues. They're basically, think of them as almost subliminals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So as you're reading, you're seeing these bolded letters. You may not be paying attention to the bolded letters initially. You might go back and take a look and read at them. But as you're initially reading the book, you're reading it through with the bolded letters. These are subliminal messages that are taking place. And some of these subliminal messages, I have an example here. I'll read it from one of my slides. So in the Memoirs of Billy Shears, one of the pages, the bolded letters say, "I play the long-running show. All performances require each to have one role with a name in some other show. Every role has its own name. The part of Paul is the same. I go by several names." So what Bill is saying there is that he's an entertainer, that he's Mark Devlin's a very good friend of mine, a lifetime actor. He plays characters. That's what he did. He played the character of Phil Ackrell from the band The Diplomats when he played with Denny Lane in the early 60s. He played the character of Vivian Stanshall, and so on. So that's the encoding. Now, the other thing with the encoding is that the first letters of each sentence, I think it's every other sentence. I have to go back and take a look at it. When you read not horizontal, but vertically down, you're going to get even more encoding. You're going to get additional insights.
Is that the third layer that you talked about?
Yeah, it's like let's just say that's the third layer. So let's just say the first layer is just reading the words. The second layer would be the bolded letters. The third layer would be reading the text vertically. Now, I've had people come to me, some have been researchers, and they think, the Memoirs of Billy Shears is nothing but, Freemasonic nonsense and all this stuff, and that Tom U. Harriet is nothing but Paul is dead, forum troll, and so on. Some of these people have not even read the book, and they're making these statements. You have to understand how much effort and work went into this book. In order to make the second layer and the third layer to work, that is a massive undertaking that requires an incredible amount of skill.
Really?
To be able to do that.
It's like a huge like crossword puzzle almost.
Exactly.
Got all kinds of layers to it. That's amazing.
And 666 pages worth, right?
And Walt, you're a writer and you've written a book. Could you imagine trying to do something like that with Blood Club? Like have 3 layers of messaging in that? I mean,
well, there is different layers when you write anything,
right?
but it's not so specifically encoded like that. You try to imbue some kind of a message into what that's below what the actual words say. But
no, I mean
to do what Mike is talking about is just like he said. I can't even imagine what.
How would you even start?
Do that.
How would you even create an outline to be able to do that? I simply cannot imagine. But the thing is that this entire book, and I'm looking at it on Amazon, and I'm about to pull the trigger on it. You look at it though, and it was like, I mean, if you know anything about books that they sell on Kindle, on Amazon through Kindle, they're usually pretty inexpensive. But for a Kindle book to be more than $20, that's almost unheard of. That's pretty rare. And to find out that it is 666 pages, not including all the blank pages that they sneak in there and the acknowledgments and stuff like that, that is in and of itself is that this seems like this is a pretty dense volume. And so this is something that everybody can pick up, even though it's a little bit pricey. We're not trying to sell any books here, I don't think. But you would consider this book here to be definitive proof of what really happened to Paul McCartney?
I would, yes. Now, people will argue that because the book is called historical fiction.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So the reason why it's called historical fiction is because, and this is explained in the book in great detail, it's because Bill has signed confidentiality agreements and non-disclosures. He has secrecy agreements in place. And if he breaks those secrecy agreements, those non-disclosures or those confidentiality agreements, if he breaches them, I mean, he can lose a lot.
Everything.
We're talking about everything, right? So what they've done is they've put the book in play as historical fiction. And there are elements of it that have been fictionalized. Maybe it was a particular conversation that took place, maybe originally, or let's say it took place in New York City. They will take that conversation. They might change the conversation just a little bit, keeping the actual content and intent of the original conversation, but they might move it to to L.A. I'm just using that as an example. So it's things like that take place in the book. But I have gotten to know Tom. I don't want to say we're best friends, but we are acquaintances now after 2 years of me doing the research into this. And Tom and I have conversed back and forth here and there. I've asked him a lot of questions. He has been very gracious as far as getting back to me and explaining what he could. The other thing is Tom is also bound by secrecy agreements and confidentiality agreements. He can't spill the beans on certain things, but he will point me in certain directions. Tom has said to me that, Mike, through the layering of the book, once you get into the second layer, the third layer, and so on, the book is no longer fiction. So, and that's how it's been explained to me. And of course, there are going to be folks that are not going to buy that. They're going to say, the whole thing is fiction, and because they'll argue about the date. Some will argue that his real name is not Shepard. They'll argue that he wasn't killed in a car crash. Some will argue that original biological Paul is still alive. And so I try to avoid getting into those debates because they're circular debates. You can never win them because at the end of the day, it all becomes that person's particular perspective and conjecture. And that's why I bring it around to, okay, so let's get back to Tavistock, right? Let's talk about the Tavistock psyop, because that's really what it's all about at the end of the day, in my view. But the book itself, I would say that anybody who is into the Paul is Dead research, if you have not read the book, you need to read the book. If this is not something that tickles your fancy and it's just kind of like a fleeting thing, it's kind of entertaining, then don't read the book. But if you're really into this and you're very intrigued by it, the book will be a mind blower. I've had people write me and they said, Mike, I listened to the shows and I finally broke down and I bought the book, and I'm so glad that I did, because I cannot believe how much detail is in the book. And that's the thing. There is so much detail in the book that only somebody that was there could have possibly compiled that much information. In fact, I had one email with Tom going back, I guess, about a year ago, and I asked him a question. It might have been a question about Phil Ackrell, which is a character that Bill played in the early 1960s with Denny Lane. The band was the Diplomats. And Tom wrote me back, and he said, Mike, I have to go through the boxes to take a look and see if I can get you an answer. So what was implied in Tom's response was, I have to go back and take a look, in the boxes, means that he received boxes of information. And I'm sure those boxes of information were categorized and sorted and broken out, to the nth degree, in great, great detail. So, this stuff was sent over to him. Now, we talked a little bit before about the book being encoded the way it is and how intricate it is. The other thing is that we have to understand that within the secret societies, for those in the secret societies, and like we'll say Freemasonry, that are intrepid, they are trained very early on to have certain skills. Tom being trained to be a writer in literature and so on. His training had to be extensive to such a degree that he's able to do the encoding that he did. Tom was selected to do this work. And the way it works is within the Masonic pyramid, think of it as like a corporation. If you guys have worked for a corporation, I used to work in the corporate world. You have the CEO's office at the top of the pyramid, and then some decision is made, some strategy needs to be executed and put into play. Well, what happens is then the people underneath the CEO, they seek out the people within the organization, within the pyramid that have those skills and that expertise, and they bring them together and they form teams. And then these teams work on the initiative to put the project out, to deliver their deliverables, however you want to, kind of phrase it. This is exactly how Freemasonry works. So Tom was selected as part of a team because of his skills and his expertise in his writing abilities. That's how it works. It's very, very organized. I know.
Mike, Mike, do you think he was working off of a manuscript that was provided by Bill Shepard, or do you think he worked in conjunction with him to produce this book of amazing amount of encoding? How do you think the process went?
I think that, and I can only say I think because Tom has not given me information on this, right. and I understand why. But so I'm not going to press him on things that I know that he can't answer. So this is how I think it works. I think that Bill has been documented from day one. So I believe that he has probably one of the most documented and referenced lives of anybody that we know. So, which means that, everything that he's done, concerts, songs, things he's said, TV shows and interviews and so on, all documented by him, maybe perhaps some of it by him. But I believe that he has an inner circle. And this inner circle is responsible for the actual documentation of Bill Shepard playing the part of Paul McCartney. That makes sense. So I don't think anybody sat down at one point and said, "Oh, okay, let's reinvent the wheel here. Let's just kind of start writing about him." No, I think what happened was there's a dossier on William Shepard, and it's extensive. And I think that there were extractions from that dossier that were given to Tom in the form of these boxes I mentioned, these files, and it was Tom's job to put it together. And that's not to say that Tom's job was not incredibly involved. I mean, it was no cakewalk for him. Again, I'm giving you my theory. He was given the information. It was very organized, and but it was then up to him to take that organized information and make chronological sense out of it, on top of the fact that he was asked to encode the book, to have that second and third layer. Mm-hmm. So that's how I think it worked. Now, do I think that Tom knows Bill personally? I can't answer that question. I think that there was maybe there is some one-on-one correspondences, but I'm going to assume that most of it has come from people within the inner circle outside of Bill, very close to Bill, but not Bill himself. Mm-hmm. But I have picked up on a couple of conversations where I had with Tom where it seemed to me like, maybe he did have a conversation or two with Bill directly.
It's funny, you mentioned Denny Lane before, and he's the guitarist from Wings that Paul used in Wings, I think. I guess for most of the Wings albums. But I saw an interview with him. It was on YouTube, I guess, and he was sitting down with an American writer or something, and they were drinking. They were drinking. Denny was drinking some kind of liquor, and this guy that was interviewing him was drinking beer, and they were slogging it down during the course of the interview. It was only about a half hour, maybe, or something. And by the time they got near the end of the interview, Denny was kind of feeling no pain, and he started talking about Bill Shepard.
Right.
And the guy that was interviewing, it kind of surprised him with it, like, oh, by the way, what's it like playing with Bill Shepard, and he said, he kind of paused for a minute, and then he's kind of like, he said, you could see his mind going, thinking, oh, what the hell? Yeah, Bill Shepard's, I love playing with Bill Shepard, and not Billy Campbell, though, he said, so I just thought that was kind of weird that he would,
Yeah.
And I know he was involved in that whole, the Mersey sound, which goes back to, the early Beatles sound and Ferry Across the Mersey and all those songs. So he was in, and you said he was in with the other guy, Phil Averill. He played with him too, who was apparently Bill Shepard,
right, in
some kind of other permutation of him or whatever. But,
right. So the whole thing with Denny Lane, I actually did a video on this. So that's a very good, it's a very good topic to talk about because it is a great example of masterful speak. So first of all, we should all know that Denny Lane's real name is Brian Frederick Hines.
Oh, okay.
In relation to
Denny Lane
Hines
is a stage name. Okay, so there we go with playing parts, right? He and Bill Shepard go way back, so they go back to the days of the Diplomats when they played together. Phil Ackrell and Denny Lane. Now, in that interview, I think that was Renegade Nation, and I believe the interview goes back to 2016 or 2017. So the guy that was interviewing him, who was, he was pretty rocked, but he asked some good questions. He said, what was it like to play with Billy Shepard? And so Denny Lane says, oh, you mean Billy Shears? Now, listen to what Denny Lane said. He didn't say no. He said, oh, Billy Shears. Well, Shears is a play off of the name Shepard, right? Shears, Shepard.
Sheep.
Right.
Yeah, right, okay. So during that interview, the important thing to notice is that Denny Lane never mentions the name Paul McCartney. Never mentions it.
Yeah.
And then the interviewer says, oh, you mean Billy Shears Campbell, or something to that effect.
Yes.
Yeah, Billy Shears Campbell. And so the interviewer also says to Denny Lane, he goes, I hope you don't mind, asking these questions. And so Denny says, oh, no, I can do this all night. And I'm paraphrasing here. So what Denny was really saying was, I can toy with you all night. Mm-hmm. Denny is very, very, he's knee deep into this, just like Bill Shepard is. That's what he was really saying to him. We could do this all night because I can go round and round. It's kind of fun. And this is the masterful speak part of it. At the end of the interview, Denny says, well, who the hell is Billy Campbell anyway?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what Denny Lane was saying is, he's not Billy Campbell. I never mentioned the name Paul McCartney. Mm-hmm. And I never denounced the name Shepard. I just referred to him as Shears. That's the layering part of it. So we can kick out the name Paul McCartney because he's not Paul McCartney. We can kick out the name Billy Campbell because he's not Billy Campbell. What are we left with? We're left with Billy Shears. And who's Billy Shears? Billy Shears is William Shepard. That's what Denny was telling us.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that McCartney or Bill did as McCartney on the Letterman show back in 2009. There was a whole bit there. Right?
Yeah,
that's classic.
Too.
That is classic masterful speaking, and he's superb at it. He is superb at it. So, and then at the very end, he puts his fingers to his lips, which basically is tell no secrets.
The Illuminati's.
Yeah. So, and of course, we were talking before, people don't pick up on that stuff, but once you know it.
They don't. You'd think he was just saying, shh, like just kind of joking around sort of thing. You had said, too, in another interview I saw that Letterman is a Mason, too.
Oh, yeah.
High-level Mason. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense, too. my whole world is being is being changed by looking at these people differently. I've been a Letterman fan for years and years and years. I always loved his work, but not that really changes anything, I guess. But it just puts another whole layer on it that you didn't think about.
One of the things I'd like to
that people have to understand that not all Freemasons are evil.
No, not at all.
So I know, but there are going to be people that they believe that. They believe if somebody's a Freemason that they're evil, and so all of these folks that are in the in positions of influence, affluence, control, wealth, and so on, they're all in secret societies. They're all in secret societies. I mean, the music industry and the entertainment industry is completely controlled. Mm-hmm. Completely controlled.
Don't doubt it.
Right. So, and that's what we have to get our heads wrapped around. That's why there's so much Illuminati symbolism in the music business and in Hollywood and so on. Well, why do you think that is? Right.
Yeah. It's because it makes sense. Yeah.
They're all in the club. They're all in the club. Yeah.
Are there various factions that vie for to get a leg up on the other one, or do they all sort of work together? That's been kind of one of my questions. I don't really know how it all works, but do they ever get into like petty power struggles or that kind of thing that you know of anyway?
I'll tell you how I think it works. I believe at the end of the day they're all working toward the same objective because they are all in the club, and you have to stay in the club. If you walk off the reservation, then you are permanently set out. You are ostracized. Mm-hmm. But I believe the way it works is that
being shunned by the
you
by
are
the
definitely
religious groups. Yeah.
Yes, you're definitely shunned, and you don't get to come back. This is what I was told. Mm-hmm. Now, the way I think it works is that it's within. Let's stay on the music business as an example.
Right.
Nobody is handed anything on a silver platter. What is handed to them is the opportunity, and they have to earn that opportunity, by the way, right? So somebody's going to select them.
Hey, Walt?
So those that are intrepid. What's that?
No, because the thing is,
there's a break there.
I just want to interject here for a second. This is like the third time that we have had interruptions while recording this podcast. Is it just a coincidence? I have no idea, but Walt and I will share with you that there have been times when we have done controversial topics and it'll just cut out for no apparent reason. Take that as you were. Go ahead.
Could be your equipment too, Eric.
Well, I think it could be operator error as well. I'm not, but go ahead.
So go ahead, Mike.
Okay. All right. So the way I believe it works is that it's like within a corporation. So you're in the corporation. So just imagine you work for GE as an example. So, and imagine that GE is the secret society. So you've gone in there. You applied and they went through the interviews and boom, you're in. Now, once you're in there, you have to vie for position. So, which means you have to vie for promotion. And that's how it works. So, they're given opportunities to excel, and if they excel, then they are rewarded. They're rewarded with higher positions. They're rewarded with more money. They're rewarded with more influence, and so on. And you use the music industry, you can use government, you can use the military. I mean, just pick one. That's how it works. So it's not like they're walking around handing out candy. You have to earn your position within the pyramid. Okay, this is why you'll see like many of these musicians, especially out of Britain, out of the UK, they'll have their different titles like CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, or the OBE, which is Officer of the Order of the British Empire, the MBEs, which the Beatles received back in 1966. These are all awards that are handed out because you've achieved a certain level of prominence within the pyramid on a particular rung of a ladder. So, okay, so we're going to recognize you with an MBE, an OBE, a CBE, or you might get knighted. You see? So that's how I believe it works. It's not so much an easy path. They have to earn it, but if they earn it, then there's going to be great rewards.
So, by your estimation, when the Beatles were put together, or were they put together, or were they just these four guys that had a good amount of talent? Obviously, they're talented guys. They're not trained musicians, we know that, but they are very talented musically. Did they form kind of out of happenstance, and then Tavistock noticed them and said, hey, these guys are going to fit what we're looking for, or was it totally orchestrated right from the get-go, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do want to say one thing. The original Beatles were not trained in music, but Bill Shepard is. Bill is very much trained in music. Right?
He's more of a refined musician.
He can read, write, score music. Okay. So with the original Beatles, I believe the way it works, or the way it worked, and probably still works this way, is that there are bands out there. So back in the day, they're playing out in the Cavern, they're playing out in Germany, and so on. There were many, many bands that were doing this.
Right.
And so I think Tavistock looks at that as a pool of resource, and they keep an eye on them. And they watch for particular bands, and they say, you know what? We think that band might work. So pay attention to them, and let's start seeing if we can bring them into the fold. Let's see if we can start bringing them in. And other bands they might look at and say, no, not them. So, they don't become anything. So I think that the Beatles from the very beginning were very much earmarked to do what it is that Tavistock ultimately planned to do with them, which was to make them this phenomenal music force. And they nurtured them along the way. I do not believe the story about them being turned down by Decca Records. I think that that's just a story that was told to us. The Beatles were not, in a sense, organic at any point, maybe in the very, very beginning. But once they were being eyeballed, and as I mentioned, they were all Freemasons because otherwise they would not have received MBEs in 1966. They were pulled along. And once they got signed by EMI, then all bets were off as far as anything being organic, because EMI has a long history of being tied into Tavistock and British intelligence. And then, of course, they were assigned to George Martin as their producer. That was, that wasn't just picking a name out of a hat.
Yeah.
This is all very, very calculated. And so they took these four guys that were playing in nightclubs and some pretty rough places, especially in Germany, and they polished them up. Mm-hmm. All of the screaming girls and all that stuff. I mean, it's known now that most of these girls that were screaming and yelling were bussed in order to create the demand.
The illusion of
the illusion of it.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, you initially bring it in, and then human behavior being what it is, other people follow suit. So you no longer had to bus them in or pay people. Now people were driving there for free, screaming their heads off. So it caught on. So the Beatles
it fulfilled itself. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, sort of.
Exactly right. Yeah. So the Beatles, I don't think were ever truly, truly organic. I believe that they were always controlled. I think they themselves in the beginning didn't know that. I believe that they felt like, hey, we're getting a big break and so on. As you mentioned earlier, they got a lot of help by at the very least by George Martin.
Right, and who was, I think, a genius producer in his own right. Yeah.
And who else that we don't even know of? Because there's so many players in this game, guys, that these people, we'll never know their names. These are people that are essentially, behind the curtain. So we don't know who they are. I mean, people like, Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall, these were all, handlers. These are people that were part of the process of steering and managing the group. I'm not saying they're bad people. That was their job.
That was their job, yeah. There was a guy that they referred to as Maxwell, who I think was a handler. He may have been MI5 or MI6 maybe, who I think was involved in this too. We didn't even get to that, but which is where Maxwell's silver hammer comes from on Abbey Road. What about Epstein? What do you think Brian Epstein fits into the whole thing?
Epstein was a Freemason too, and again, there's people going to be screaming at their speakers right now because they don't want to believe that.
That's okay. We've had that before.
No, let them scream.
We're okay with that.
Trust me, I've got thick skin. But he was a Freemason, and there's no way he could not have been, considering what we've just gone through. In fact, in the book, Bill says that when biological Paul passed away, that his uncle, Bill's uncle, and we believe his uncle's name is Albert. That's where we get the song Uncle Albert.
Right.
He was a very high-level Freemason, and he made a call to George Martin, and he told George Martin that this is the new guy. This is who you're going to put in the slot there. So when George Martin finally caught up with, like it was like a day later, he initially couldn't catch up with Brian Epstein. He was out of pocket. He caught up with him the next day, and he started to tell him that we're going to be putting this guy in place of Paul. Brian said, "Hey, I already know. I already got the call." So how did Brian Epstein get the call? Brian Epstein got the call because Brian Epstein's in the club. He was in the club.
Yeah.
So Epstein was in it, and I think that Epstein's influence started to wane once Bill came on board, because Bill was the de facto manager of the Beatles once he joined the band. Back in late 1966 is when he came in. Pepper was his first
came in and took control, didn't he? I mean, because Lennon was sort of the leader, originally. I think
that was Bill's demand.
In some sense, yeah.
Bill said he would not do this unless he had total control of the band. So Billy took over, and 2 months after Pepper was released back in June 1st, 1967, June 1st, right, 6 times 1 is 6, so back to 6 again. And Please Me, by the way, was released on March 22nd. 3 times 22 is 66. 2 months after the release of Sgt. Pepper, Brian Epstein dies of an overdose, an alleged overdose. And there's a lot of people that don't believe that it was an overdose. They believe that his death was very mysterious. So I think that they just didn't need Brian Epstein in the picture anymore, because the guy that was doing his job is now in the band.
Yeah, that makes sense. Getting back to the original event where supposedly the biological Paul was killed or died, do you think that was an accident per se, or do you think that was orchestrated because he was showing some signs of not following the script or something like that? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and one that is very difficult to answer.
Yeah, I know. I just thought maybe you might.
That's
have
what Walt does.
Well,
Walt asks difficult questions. I believe
that it's possible that something nefarious took place, and let me I'll take you through some dates, and the audience can draw their own conclusions. And
well, that's part of it. If you kind of look at the dates and when it happened and all those things, it's kind of weird,
Yeah. So the dates. So this comes out of Memoirs. So Bill gives us all the dates. So Paul is in a car crash late in the evening on Sunday, September 11th, 1966, and he passes away. Brian Epstein meets Bill Shepard on the next day, September 12th, and brings him on board. Now, Shepard was also known as Billy Pepper, amongst other things. We talked about Ackroll and Vivian Stanshall.
A la Dr. Pepper.
Well, Sergeant Pepper.
I'm not Dr. Pepper, Sergeant Pepper. Yeah, Sergeant
right.
Pepper. That's kind of curious, too. But anyway,
go
ahead.
So you have Epstein sends Lennon a telegram. In the book, they say that Lennon was in Paris. That was on Tuesday, September 13th, 1966. Epstein introduces Bill to John on Friday, September 16th, 1966. That's 5 days later in Paris, France. And so when they meet, Shepard has a list of demands, and the biggest one being that he leads the Beatles going forward. He said they weren't going to do any more love songs, Boy Loves Girl, I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You. He was going to take the band in a different direction. Lennon was in duress, and so he agrees to relinquish control. And then Bill became the new leader of the Beatles, and Sgt. Pepper was his debut album. So that's how it transpired. So, Paul dies the evening of September 11th, 1966. That's a Sunday. And then the following Friday, Bill's in a room with Brian Epstein and John Lennon in France. So I don't know. You tell me.
Well, it's kind of curious that all of those things would sort of be waiting in the wings. I mean, if it was just a pure accident, you'd have to think that, everybody would be scrambling to try to figure out what they're going to do. I mean, number one, are you going to try to keep it from getting reported on, which is a big thing right there in itself. I've seen, have you ever notice there's a picture of the Aston Martin apparently that biological Paul was supposedly driving, and it's really wrecked. Apparently he was decapitated. That's what the reports are anyway, I guess.
Right. That's the theory. He was decapitated.
That's the theory. But you can see the last, I think, three numbers or 3 letters on the license plate. I wonder if anybody's ever traced that to see, or if you even could. I don't know. It just kind of crossed my mind. I didn't know whether you knew anything about that. But that would kind of tell you whose car it was anyway. That doesn't necessarily say that he was in it, but or if that's even actually the picture of the car. This is all stuff you don't really know. But,
that's the problem. The problem is that they cover all bases. So, I mean, they'll give you clues like that. They'll give you license plates, and then people go off chasing rabbits down rabbit holes.
Yeah,
and
it's got disinformation,
sort of, Disinformation. Some people believe it wasn't even that car. That was another car that was involved in the accident. So that whole piece of it is very sketchy. And of course, like I mentioned earlier in the show, some people believe that he didn't even die in a car crash. It was some other way that he died, but who knows?
That was all made up, maybe. Who knows? Yeah, it's hard to say. But apparently what it looks like is that, this guy was sort of groomed to take over. Now, what did they have to do to him? I've seen some pictures of him when he was doing the, what was it, Billy and the Pepper Pots thing that was back... I don't know, when was that, in the early 60s or
very early 60s? Yeah, it was going into the Beatle period, 63, 64.
Yeah, he was actually doing some Beatle covers. He was singing on some of the albums that he did.
Yes,
I Want to Hold Your Hand, I think, or was it? And he had his own songs too. So apparently he was a songwriter to begin with, and he was familiar with singing Beatles type material. What did they have to do to him? In your opinion, what did you think they had to do to him physically to sort of get him to look, in the ballpark anyway? I mean, or did he resemble him to a high degree to begin with?
No, he didn't resemble him really much at all. And so what they had to do was there was extensive plastic surgery that was done. I call it reconstructive surgery. It wasn't a facelift, so they had to reconstruct his face. And this is why there are multiple Paul McCartneys. We can get into that maybe a little bit too, because people always ask me that question. And in the book, he says he's the one with the permanent contract, but there were others who stepped in to play the part. And the others that stepped in to play the part, the others that stepped in to play the part would have been when he was having surgery. So there was surgery, there were fillers. They had to fill out his face a little bit because Bill's normal face is longer than Paul's. Paul kind of had a rounder type of face, and Bill's face is more
baby face, sort of pudgy oval kind of face. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they also used latex. And I actually have two video clips of proof that latex was used. And he says this in the book. I mean, he says surgeries, fillers, and latex were used. So that's how they did it. And along with others that filled in here and there to play Paul. And one of the things I did, guys, was going back when I first got into this back in 2016 was I put a collage together of the many faces of Paul McCartney over time. And when you take a look at Paul McCartney over time, you're going to see that there are very different characters playing the part. It's not the same person. It's certainly not the person that we know as biological Paul. Mm-hmm. So that means that there were a number of people playing the character of Paul McCartney.
Bill Shepard is older too, right? Isn't he, I think, like 5 years older or something?
5 years older, yeah. I think I figured out his birthday too, and I wrote to Tom, and Tom hadn't gotten back to me. So that either means that Tom's too busy
or you're right.
Back to me, or I'm right.
Or you're right on, yeah. It's funny, I worked with a lady whose daughter, I think, lived in Arizona, and the guy that we think of as Paul McCartney, who I think is really Bill Shepard, she saw him. He has a ranch in Arizona, I think, or something. And she saw him walking around downtown, wherever the town is. I don't know where it is. And she said she saw this guy, and he looked really old, like really old. And she was trying to figure out, there was people stopping and talking to him and asking him for autographs probably. And so she said, who is that old guy? And somebody said, oh, that's Paul McCartney. He has a ranch, outside of town. And he comes into town every once in a while. So that's kind of funny. But I mean, he is old. He's even if he was the real Paul McCartney, he'd have to be really pretty old at this point, in his like mid 70s, I guess, or something. But
Bill is 81.
Oh, he's 81. Okay, so I saw a recent picture of him, and a plastic surgeon weighed in on it. And he said his face now shows the signs of older plastic surgery. It's all kind of drooping and sagging, and he looks really bad. I mean, I don't judge him, but he looks really old. He doesn't. But when you see him on TV and stuff, he looks. They kind of put a lot of makeup on him, I'm sure. But it just is curious that he, and like if you look at Ringo would probably be about the same age as the original Paul.
Yeah,
maybe he was a few years older, I guess. I think Paul was actually the youngest one, but he doesn't look that bad. I mean, he looks okay. But the guy that's playing McCartney looks like a real old man, and so I don't know. There's another sign, I guess. Maybe,
your skin loses its elasticity, and so the doctor, of course, is absolutely right. I mean, after all those years of fillers and surgeries and stuff like that, it doesn't hold together. Yeah. And so if you take a look at the pictures today, you could see, they did something with his chin. You can see they did something along his cheek area. And I believe his birthday is September 9th, 1937, and that's why he's so focused on September 9th. And so, which means that he'll be 81 years old this September 9th. And I was told that this is what I was told, is more proof so people can listen to the show and see that, there is inside information coming forth. He's going to be consolidating his websites that will be effective this September 9th. So there's some websites he has out there. They're going to be consolidated. I was also told that there are other projects in the works. One of them is very extensive about him, and it will probably be released after he passes away. But another key date is September 9th of 2020, so 2 years from now. And I believe that there's going to be a substantial amount of disclosure, maybe not total disclosure, because I'm told that total disclosure can only come after he passes away. But I believe that we'll get really, really close to like maybe 90% of disclosure on September 9th of 2027. And the reason why that date is so important, because 9 September, the day 9/2027, if we take the last two digits, 27, add them together, it's 9. So it's another 999. And he would be 90 years old, so another 9.
Wow. It's funny. I went back and I read the. I don't know if you I'm sure have read it. The interview with John Lennon that he did with Playboy, right before he was actually pretty close to when he was killed, I think.
Yeah, I read it a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, you should go back and read it again. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I had read it, I think, when it originally came out, and of course at that time it was just John Lennon talking, But he really cast a lot of disparity on what he's saying is Paul, in terms of his songwriting, and he was saying that Lennon added a lot of the edginess to the songs. He called it the bluesy edge, and McCartney sort of provided the poppy kind of sing-songy, good time kind of feel to it, which makes a lot of sense. But he also said that McCartney would show up at his door. You probably remember that part of it, and just like any time of the night or day with his guitar, and try to ask John to help him out with a song. This is when John lived in Dakota, and he had his. He was going through his phase where he was doing his child rearing, and he didn't really want to do that anymore. So one day he had to just tell him, just hey Paul, just or Fall. He might have called him Fall or Bill. I don't know. I said just at least call when before you're going to come. Just show up. And so there was a lot of kind of subtle clues in there. He really disparaged the music after the Beatles that Paul had produced with Wings and the solo stuff. He actually said that the last good song that he wrote was The Long and Winding Road. If you look at like you said, there's always some kind of underlying message there if you really get past what he's actually saying, So I just found that kind of interesting, going back and looking at that with a little bit different of an eye toward that kind of thing,
Well, so, John spills the beans in the song "How Do You Sleep?" So I would recommend that everybody listening to the show go back and listen to the song "How Do You Sleep?" He lays it all out there. In fact, in the book, Bill says that he was a big fan of a genre of music which was called boogaloo, which is Latin music and dance, which was popular here in the United States in the 1960s. And they used to have a nickname for him. They used to call him Boogaloo. And so Ringo released the song "Back Off Boogaloo." Yeah,
right. That's right.
So these are all little clues that are out there, and these clues they persisted even after the Beatles broke up. I just released a clip from the Martin Scorsese George Harrison documentary "Living in the Material World," where there's a scene toward the latter part of the documentary where George is sitting on a couch, and Bill comes in. And George says, "Hello, William. It's good. How have you been? It's good to see you again." Now, that was left in the documentary, and that was left in the documentary for a reason. That didn't slip by people who were editing.
Oh no, I'm sure not. Yeah.
Right? So they're telling you his name is William. So the Beatles knew him as Bill, William. There's another clip of Lennon and George Harrison having lunch at the Dakota, where Yoko was serving tea and stuff like that. And they talk about Beatle Bill.
Yes, I saw that, where Lennon was working on Imagine or something.
Yeah,
and he's working on that, either song or album, and I saw that where he called him Bill the Beatle or something like that. And I don't think I don't think the other Beatles liked him very much. It seemed. I don't think Ringo's never really ever weighed in on it very much, has he?
Well, no. I mean, he did the song "Back Off Boogaloo," and he had the song "I'm the Greatest" on his Ringo album back in 1973, where he's definitely talking about Bill. But Ringo did it in kind of subtle ways. George Harrison clearly did not have any love for him. This was very clear in the 1980s. He always seemed to be taking a shot at him. It didn't get better until they got together and they did the anthology stuff. Yeah. So I think that there was a terse relationship. In the book, he says that the relationship between him and John was very up and down. There were times when he and John got along.
Yeah, there it goes again. We just lost the signal again.
So so I think you guys there?
Yeah, no, we just lost the signal again.
Oh, okay.
I also wanted to interject here is that Ringo has been very vocal so far this year. I think there's one big, huge news story where he came right out and he said, "Oh yeah, the original Paul McCartney died back in the 60s." And Bill or whoever he is, or Paul McCartney II, came out and said, "Why are you doing that? I mean, the rumors are already rampant. Why feed into that?" And Ringo just kind of like shrugged it off. Do you think that Ringo has pretty much had enough, and he's just letting it all loose, and he's just letting it all out, and he's not waiting for the right time? He wants to get the word out now.
Well, there's one news article that's out there that is a hoax, so we have to be careful about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is a hoax.
That is a hoax? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so you have to be careful with that one. I think Ringo, there's a reason why Ringo got knighted so late. He just got it about a month ago or so. And I think it's because, he did come out with songs like "Back Off Boogaloo" and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm just surmising here, but I think he ventured too much into into a place or a space that he really shouldn't have ventured into. I think they looked at that as a direct affront. And so the way these societies work too is they'll put you in the penalty box. Now, they won't put you in the penalty box. It won't be like, next week. They'll wait years and years and years. So I think in the case of Ringo, what they did was they really delayed his being knighted for a very, very long time. Now, some people will say, well, that's because his contribution wasn't as significant as the other Beatles. Well, John and George couldn't be knighted because they died. But if they had lived, I'm sure they would have been knighted early on. But I think Ringo paid a little bit of a price. I don't know if he was that quiet about it. With Ringo, you had to kind of read between the lines with a lot of his stuff. There was I read one article where when the Beatles were dissolving and there were certain demands that were being made, this is when they were fighting between who was going to manage the Beatles' financials. Was it going to be Alan Klein, or was it going to be the Eastmans, which was Linda's family, who were prominent lawyers? Mm. And so the other three Beatles, they had drawn up a document, and they were going to send it registered or certified mail. And Ringo said, "No, it's okay. Look, I'll just deliver it. Okay, I don't want the guy to get something through the mail. The three of us have come up with this. Let me deliver it." And the way the story goes, and this is actually told by Bill himself, when Ringo showed up and handed them the letter, and when Bill read the letter, Bill had become infuriated, and Bill had said that he was so angry. He said it didn't come to blows, but he said it almost got to the point where he was going to get physical with Ringo during this encounter. All Ringo was doing, happy old Ringo, was saying, I don't want to insult the guy by having it done through the mail. Let me drive it over to his house. But that's how much animosity there was at that time. People don't have insights into things like this. And of course, there was the famous conversation between Bill and George during Let It Be, where Bill is trying to explain to George how he should play his guitar. And you could tell George was like, look, I'll play whatever you want me to play. If you don't want me to play, I can do that too. I'll do whatever it is that pleases you. Mm-hmm. And I've always told people that is not how two guys that were childhood friends would speak to each other, unless something really, really went south or really went bad. So, he was the outsider. He was the outsider, no doubt about it.
Well, also Harrison never got what I considered his fair share of songs on each. He'd get maybe one or two songs, and
right.
and Ringo would get maybe one kind of silly song, and then the other guys would get the rest. So I think there was maybe some resentment about that. But so do you think the real reason why the Beatles broke up? I mean, you hear all this stuff about John and Yoko and all this stuff, and Linda and Paul and blah blah blah. Do you think the real reason is that they got sick and tired of Bill Shepard calling all the shots and controlling the whole thing? Because it's pretty clear when you look at starting in '66 with Sgt. Pepper. I mean, that's a clear departure from what the Beatles were doing previous to that. I mean, it's almost like a total transformation, which is, to me, is another good clue as to what really went on. I mean, that's a groundbreaking album. It's a wonderful piece of genius work, I think. So, if he's responsible for that, and that's one of the things Lennon said in that interview, was that was Paul's baby. That was Paul's idea, the whole Sgt. Pepper thing. So, it all just makes sense when you start thinking about it. So do you think maybe that's the real reason why the Beatles broke up? I'm asking for your opinion, but.
Well, in the book, Shepard says that he was the one who decided to break the Beatles up. It didn't have anything really to do with Yoko. That was all. That was just all a cover story. What had happened? Yeah. What happened was it just got to the point where they couldn't work together anymore. It was just too much hard feelings. It was too much animosity, and quite honestly, they had kind of broken away from that whole mop top thing. Lennon was off Yoko doing his avant-garde stuff, and George was doing his thing, and so on. And they weren't really the tight-knit band anymore. So, but my personal theory is, based upon the book and then doing additional research, tons of it, is that it was just time. It's just they were not a cohesive group anymore, and so that's when they decided that they were going to do Abbey Road. Abbey Road was really their true last album. because Let It Be was recorded before Abbey Road, the video.
Sure.
The film.
Sort of pieced together, kind of, right?
Yeah, and you could see in Let It Be that it just seemed to be all detached. There was nothing, cohesive about that film. It didn't look like they were enjoying each other's company. In some cases, I remember one scene where Bill is talking to John about, going out and, playing live again. And they were sitting at a table, and John's got a cigarette in his hand, and he's got this look on his face of total boredom. Like, I really don't want to be talking about this. And so, when you see that, you can see that there was a deterioration, that, the band, even the band as it existed 2 years prior, let's say going back to 67 and 68, that it wasn't the same band anymore. So Bill decided to, fold his cards and pull the plug, and that was that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you.
That's another thing. I'm sorry. Just wanted to touch on the fact that 66, I believe, was when they stopped touring, right? Was that when they came out and said,
Brian Epstein.
That and I bought it at the time. I think they said that, they couldn't reproduce on live what they were doing in the studio, so and there was too much noise from the crowd screaming, and they couldn't hear themselves, and which I bought. It sounded logical, but I think part of it was they were covering up the fact that biological Paul was not there anymore, and it was a new guy. Is that something you think too, or?
I think both things are true. I do believe that it was becoming more difficult for them to play live, because even if you go back to Revolver, how are you going to replicate Tomorrow Never Knows or some of the songs there? And then, of course, when you got to Pepper, back in the day in 1967, there really was no way to replicate that. You would have to have an entire orchestra show up, right, to be able to put the show on. So I think that, that was true, but it was very convenient to have that situation, because it also gave them the ability to give Bill time to go through the surgeries, to have the fillers, and to assimilate into the band. So I think it was a dual type of approach that was taking place.
Well, he's supposed to be taller too, isn't he, than biological Paul? Which a couple inches, I think, right?
Yep, you can see that with pictures with Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend.
Yes,
Paul was about the same size as Jane Asher, maybe a tiny bit taller, but Bill was much taller than Jane Asher.
So that would kind of be obvious too when they were playing in concert. Anybody had seen them before, would say, "Hey, how do you get tall?" He was like, he would have been like 24. So the chances of him growing 2 inches is a little weird. But did you have a question, Eric? You wanted to get?
Well, no. What I wanted to sort of interject here is that you look at George Harrison's body of work, where you can actually see a switch was flipped after the Beatles broke up. George Harrison released this album, All Things Must Pass, which is an obvious nod to the Beatles breaking up. But he had this huge volume of work that he released, like the 2 albums. He released the 2 albums almost immediately after the Beatles broke up. What was it, maybe a year and a half? And you could tell that this was song upon song that he must have been working on while he was still in the Beatles, and he just released this huge thing as if to say, hey, listen, I was talented too, but here's this other guy, Johnny Come Lately Bill, shows up, pushes all of us out of the way. This is what I could have given the group over the past couple of years. I still could have contributed music. So here you go. Do you think that there was a lot of sort of sticking it to the middle finger, not just to Bill or whatever his name is, but also to the establishment who were playing this game, not only to the fans of the Beatles, but also John, Ringo, and George?
Yeah, George had a backlog of material, and that's why when he came out with All Things Must Pass, he just had, he had song after song after song. And I do believe that George was, I know that George was not happy with his allocation of songs. Now, the allocation of songs really was determined by the management and the label itself. So, and he understood that from a contractual perspective. It's written into the contracts what their song contributions or the number of songs are going to be. So he was very restricted. I also find it very interesting and almost humorous that on Abbey Road, George had two songs, of course. He had Here Comes the Sun and Something, which arguably some could say are the two best songs on the album. So that was really the Beatles' swan song album, Abbey Road. And on that album, George Harrison really, he hit a home run. So I think that was an indication of what George was capable of.
I think they're clearly the two most played songs. I think you hear them more than a lot of the other songs on there. Well, that's another thing, the whole Abbey Road cover where they were supposedly depicting a funeral. That was something weird that Bill said on the Letterman show. He was talking about that because Letterman asked him about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, it was really hot, and I was wearing sandals, and then I kicked him off at the last minute." So that didn't make sense.
No.
I mean, if it was really hot and the street was really hot, why would you want bare feet?
Right.
That just didn't jive. I don't know where he was going with that, but
that's part of the masterful speaking. So what he's telling you is he's telling you something that doesn't make sense. So if somebody's listening, they would say, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't walk on a hot pavement in bare feet. You'd rather have your sandals on."
Yeah.
That's part of the disclosure. That's part of him telling you, doesn't make sense, does it? And you're going to say no. And he's going to go, what would make sense? So that's part of it. And of course, and most of the people in the audience, they're sitting there giggling and clapping and laughing and thinking, that it makes sense. So for those who have ears and for those who have eyes to see, they're going to hear and see the truth. And believe it or not, as deceptive as all of this is, he is trying to put it out there, but he has to do it in a way in which he doesn't jeopardize his own life. I don't mean in a way of death or anything, but from his financial securities, which have extended to his children. So in the book, he claims that he has to make sure that this all stays in place for his kids too.
I know his I guess it was his second wife, the one that he divorced and she got a pretty big chunk of money from him.
Heather Mills.
Yeah, she's said a couple times that I don't know if it was on record or not, but that she was going to let his secret out or something like that. I don't know the exact quote, but I guess this was when they were going through this contentious divorce that they had. So she kind of put out there the fact that she knew something that everybody else didn't know, but whether that was just because she was angry or whatever, who knows? And it could have been other stuff too. That who knows what kind of stuff he did. It's funny. I remember, and I don't know how much more time we have with you, Mike, but
keep going. It's fine.
But I remember reading an article. It was actually it was written by a young woman that had spent the night with Paul McCartney, and I don't remember the exact time frame. And I can't even remember what magazine. I think it was in a men's magazine like We or one of those magazines that don't even get published anymore. I tried to find it online and I couldn't, but she, I guess he picked her up somewhere and I guess he was quite notorious for that and in his early days. And she painted a picture of him as being very, very nasty person. I mean, he was very nasty to her. She didn't get into the particulars of their night together, but he basically in the morning he just basically kicked her out of the house. And now I don't know whether this was the biological Paul or the Billy Shepard Paul. I can't remember the time frame, but I just remember at the time thinking, wow, that's not the image I have of Paul McCartney. You kind of always thought of him as being, kind of a joking around and kind of a, loosey-goosey kind of fun guy, and this was a very dark picture of him. I wish I could dredge up the particulars on that, but that always stuck in my mind. Like something's weird about this. It's just not the Paul McCartney that I thought of, and I don't know if you're familiar with that article or not. And I wish I could relocate it, but. Yeah,
I'm not familiar with the article, but I can tell you that if it's Bill Shepard, he has a reputation for being a sour type of personality, that he could be very biting, sarcastic, very arrogant. And you can see this too. If you watch his interviews very closely, there's always this arrogance, this air about him in which he has this very uppity type of body language. I've picked up on it. A lot of people have picked up on it, And then if you take a look at the body language and the demeanor of biological Paul, it's very, very different. It's very different.
Yeah.
So that I hadn't seen that article. I don't recall reading it, but does it surprise me based upon other things that I know and other research that I've done? No, it does not.
Yeah, it just struck me, and I remembered it when I started looking into all that stuff. That at the time I read it, and I thought, oh well, maybe she was just trying to get back at him or something, But it was very. It just didn't fit the image that I had of Paul McCartney, So I don't know, maybe it got squashed or something. I don't know, but I'd like to be able to dredge it up anyway. So I guess we can probably start to wrap things up. You probably have a lot of time considerations to deal with, but do you think there's an actual smoking gun here? I mean, something that's kind of irrefutable? And I know that's a tough question, but you've done so much research into this. You have just such a wealth of knowledge on this topic. Is there any one thing that you think is, I know there's all kinds of DNA tests and things that have been done. I guess Paul had an illegitimate child by a woman in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And the DNA test didn't match.
Bettina Huber's,
the child's DNA, and then he was stopped in Japan. I guess he was going through customs, and he had marijuana, and there was some discrepancy about his fingerprints.
Yes.
Does any of that stuff? Is that the real evidence, or is there anything else that you've uncovered? Since you've been doing this, I guess.
I think it's real evidence from the standpoint of if you're doing the research and you connect the dots, you realize that these things are, in fact, evidence. And we have the Voiceprint Analysis from 1969. There was a professor, Dr. Henry Truby, from the University of Miami, and he published the fact that the new and old Paul have different voice prints. They call them sonograms, and proving they cannot be the same person. And I believe the songs that they compared were Yesterday versus Penny Lane, and then Yesterday versus Hey Jude. Mm-hmm. And this was published in Life magazine, and it went absolutely nowhere. And you're right, his arrest in January of 1980 in Japan, by the way, he was incarcerated for 9 days. We got the number 9 back again.
Wow, I didn't know that. There you go.
Yep, he had different fingerprints, and he received the fingerprints from Interpol because biological Paul, and maybe it was with Stu Sutcliffe at the time, they had set a fire back in Hamburg. It was a small fire, and they had gotten arrested, and they were fingerprinted and so on. So the Japanese, through Interpol, had the original fingerprints. And so
they had a sort of a small record that they were relying on.
Small record, right. And so the Japanese interrogated him, and they figured out he was not Paul McCartney, but an impostor. And in order for him to get out of that situation, the British government in Scotland Yard had to intercede. And that's how he got out of there. And the paternity lawsuit with Bettina Hubers, who would be the daughter, her mother was Erica Hubers. That was a big issue. They finally had to back out of that lawsuit because my understanding is that there was a statute of limitations had expired and all this stuff. And in the book, Bill says that whenever these situations come up, he claims that biological Paul, he was quite the ladies' man, and so he has some kids out there.
Summer kids
out of wedlock, some kids, and that Bill, if it ever comes up, being accused of being the father and not paying child support, it's just going to let the DNA speak for itself, because he knows the DNA is not going to match. And so what's going to happen is nobody's going to question that he's not Paul McCartney. They're just going to say that the person pursuing the lawsuit is a liar.
Right. Didn't actually get impregnated by him.
Right.
Somebody
but
else.
The biggest clue of all that I would recommend that people do is to take a look at the pictures of Paul McCartney over time. So go back to 1963, 64, 65, and go take a look at what biological Paul looks like, what he looked like. And then just year by year, take it 67, 8, 9, 70, all the way to current time. And you will see that there were many, many different faces. So the way they were able to pull this off was back in the day, we didn't have the internet, so we could sit there and copy and paste and put pictures of faces next to each other to compare. So people, he was people just said, well, that's Paul McCartney because the news magazine or the news article in Life magazine, whatever, says that's Paul McCartney. The album says it's the Beatles, and it says that's Paul McCartney. They're doing an interview, and they're saying that's Paul McCartney. So people just look at it at that moment in time, and they say that's Paul McCartney. But when you compare it over a timeline, you can clearly see, unless you just don't want to see it, you'll clearly see that it's a different person. In fact, different persons, plural, like I said, because there was more than one person playing the part of Paul McCartney over time, although Bill has a permanent contract.
Mm-hmm. So I guess another way to look at it is that, the person that's now playing Paul McCartney, it's kind of a role, like almost like an actor would play.
Right.
He actually is the character of Paul McCartney. I mean, he is in essence Paul McCartney. He's not the biological Paul McCartney, but he's what we think of as Paul McCartney. So, it's that deep rooted, that it's that deep into people's psyche now that, and a lot of people are probably going to, scoff at, after they listen to this and say, this is a bunch of crap. But you've got so much evidence, and you've mastered. You have such a mastery of this information that, after hearing this, I don't know how you can not at least take a different look at the whole thing.
Take a closer, longer look at it all, and just say,
really,
and just say, you look at this, and you can't help but wonder, who else are they doing this to? Because, in my search in the show notes, it apparently the same thing has sort of happened with Avril Lavigne, whereas people are claiming that the woman who claims to be Avril Lavigne now is not the same as Avril Lavigne from maybe 10 years ago. And there's the other aspect of all of this is that you could just say that, well, fame changes people physically and emotionally, mentally, maybe even spiritually. And that, oh, well, of course, with the hard living that he's been doing for the past 50 years, well, of course he's going to look like a dirty old man walking down the street. But you look at, celebrities who have emotional and mental breakdowns. Perfect example is Britney Spears. Britney Spears, what was it, maybe 10 years ago when she shaved her head and she just went like bat guano crazy? Could that have anything to do with what's going on with Paul McCartney and the reason why? I mean, but the Paul McCartney that we see now today, maybe it is the same Paul McCartney, and he's just had a couple emotional breakdowns. Is that at all possible? Is there any explanation for why his face looks the way it does, or his voice has changed over the years? I've heard a change in my voice by just simply doing the podcast for the past 10 years. A lot of significant changes. Is there any plausible explanation why Paul McCartney of today is so different than Paul McCartney from 1966?
Well, it's not the same guy.
I mean, I know, but
that's about as plausible as you can get.
I think what I'm looking for is for people who do not want to believe this. Is there any wiggle room for them? Is there any escape hatch? Or is this you absolutely, totally believe 100%? There's no way that you cannot believe that is not the same guy.
Well, I've reached the point where there's no question in my mind that it's not the same guy. Now, for each person, they're going to have to take a look at it themselves. And I get contacted by a lot of people, and they tell me I'm crazy and all that stuff. But they're not looking at it. What happens is people have belief systems, and they have idols, and they worship these idols. And how many times you see, oh, Sir Paul, oh, Macca, we love you, And so what happens is they don't want their bubble burst. That's really what it is at the end of the day. They don't want to believe that their reality has been fabricated for them. They don't want to believe that it's a grand illusion. And so if that's how you want to approach life, then that's your call. And it's your prerogative to live your life that way. But for others who want to really understand what this is really all about, when I say this, I'm talking about existence and our reality, you've got to look into these things. And I've had somebody ask me, well, Mike, it could be him, right? I mean, you're not tossing the idea out that biological Paul just changed over time. Like, no, it's not the same guy, period. Mm-hmm. I said, you need to go take a look. You need to stop trying to convince yourself that it's not. And if you really, really want to understand it, you need to go take a look at the research. Go look for yourself. Go buy the book. Go read the book. Start there.
Yeah. It's a,
and the bigger picture, even for me, what I came away with from all this, couple things actually, but how many things that we think of as hard and fast truth, whatever that is, or just illusion, or just things that are just created to make us believe a certain thing, and some of the things you said today that about the encrypted speech and things like that just really struck me. Like, that's probably the biggest thing I came away from today from what your message is that, there's alternative things being said here that, people just don't pick up on. And that's to me probably the most troubling aspect of it. Whether he's Paul or not is it is what it is. But there's so many more things that could be affected by or that are how our reality is affected by by Tavistock and these other groups who are pushing us toward their agenda in some sense.
No, the most terrifying thing of all of this, Walt, is the fact that if they did it to Paul McCartney, who's to say that they couldn't do it with somebody else like the American president? Like that movie really. Dave, where Kevin Kline played an actor who replaced the president after the president had a stroke while having an extramarital affair. And the thing is that I know it's just a movie, but could somebody be saying, hey, this president had been replaced by an actor? It's like if they did it with Paul McCartney, they could have done it with Ronald Reagan. They could have done it with Bill Clinton. They could have done it anybody in power. And the thing is that it's not that he had an accidental death. They may have killed this person, whoever it is we're talking about, and replaced him with a doppelganger to get their way with the American people. That's another way that you could look at that, and that's terrifying. And it was just, if they're able to do that, then all reality is up for grabs. We're talking about
that's what I was getting.
The moon landing hoax.
Who knows what you can hang your hat on? I mean, who knows what the reality of anything is what it comes down to. And I know that after talking to you today, Mike, I'm going to have a lot more awareness of what people say and how they say it, and it's just It's just remarkable, really. The stuff you're coming out with here is really very impressive. It's quite a body of work you've accumulated on this topic, and I'm sure on other topics too.
That's what I was going to ask.
I want to become a fan of your radio show too, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to want to get in on some of the other stuff you're saying. I know you have a lot of, from listening to several of your interviews, you have a lot of other areas of interest, including raising the consciousness of the planet and having a more spiritual viewpoint on things, which is what we try to do too with our
absolutely.
Talk.
That's how we got the name Metaphysical Connection.
Yeah, that's really our main intention. So, we've kept you probably longer than you wanted to stay, but this is just so fascinating and interesting, and we didn't even really cover there's areas of it that we didn't even really get to. So I can't thank you enough, Mike, for joining us today. I was very excited when you responded to me and agreed to come on. So
and come back and talk about that other stuff that you wanted to cover.
Whatever
as
you
well.
want to talk about, you have an open invitation, and we're hoping that that some of our listeners will carry on over to your show, and maybe vice versa, hopefully. So.
No, I appreciate that. It was a great talk, guys. It was freewheeling, which is what I like. And I would love to come back anytime. If you want to even follow up on more of this or any other topic that I get into, I'd be more than happy to. And we can do that. You know what,
okay. Walt, before we let Mike go here, we might actually have a special guest for our annual JFK assassination show that Walt and I.
That's another whole topic on the Tavistock. There's a book, and you're probably aware of it. It's called the Tavistock Institute. It's by Daniel Eschelin.
Yes.
That's a great book. That's what really got me turned on to this whole topic, which segued into the Beatles, and I have to say that my my fantasy about the Beatles being just these four young lads that came together and had this magical alchemical reaction to each other has been dashed on the rocks, but that's okay.
It's like what John said, the dream is over.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Lennon really was the spiritual leader of the band, and I know Harrison got into spirituality too, but Lennon, I think it pained him to have all this stuff that he knew was going on and that he knew was wrong. I think in some levels.
I think John walked off the reservation. So when he handed his MBE back in 1969, I think that was the beginning of the end for John. I remember I said that they wait a long time, to even the score, and I'm not saying they killed him. I'm not sure.
I actually think they did, but
yeah, it's possible. It's very possible. And Ole Damergaard will tell you that they did, that they had an assassin from Operation 40 actually did the shooting. But, John, I think, walked off and, he just didn't want any part of it anymore. And I think that was the beginning of his demise.
Yeah. He just couldn't live with it anymore. I think, it was weighing on his soul, I think, so to speak, so. Okay, Mike, we'll let you go. So it was a really great conversation.
So we got two topics now too. We got two topics.
Kind of have it as a conversation, not, and I'm sure you don't want to just be the talking head, it's good to have a lot of back and forth, and opens up some new avenues, which maybe you haven't even considered. So that's what's good about it. So.
Well, Eric, thank you again. I enjoyed it very much.
Okay, Mike, thanks a lot.
By the way, Mike, one more thing I'd like to also, if you have anything to say about John Lennon, we've not done an entire show on John Lennon. If you'd like to come back and talk to him on the anniversary of his birth or his death, we'd love to have you.
Well, I'd have to do some more research into John's assassination. I mean, I have begun that work. Mm-hmm. I have been. Yeah, let me see where I go with the research on John, because there's also I've told people that there were lookalikes and doubles for John too, even going back to the early days, and that really.
Yeah, I saw that too. That there was some thinking about that.
Yeah, there definitely were. Yeah. Because you could see they had different noses. John had a very distinctive nose, and if you go back to 64, 65, some of the Johns didn't have that nose. That doesn't mean that the main John wasn't the main protagonist. He was. It just means that they had stand-ins. That's just the way it works. So let me see how I progress with that, and I can get back to you guys.
Okay, Mike, thanks. Appreciate
All right, guys.
Great show.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.